Let's forget everything you think you know. We're going to look at pirate captains as ruthless CEOs.
Yeah, you probably picture some charming hero. The reality was, well, a lot more corporate.
See, their business wasn't adventure, it was robbery. It was all about the bottom line.
But being out on the open ocean, well, that created a huge business problem for them.
And here's the crazy part. Even winning a fight could be a total disaster for business.
Just think about the costs. A damaged ship, a smaller crew. These were unacceptable losses.
So a fair fight? No way. That was never the goal for a smart captain. What they really wanted was a quick, bloodless, and profitable surrender. Get in, get out.
So how did they make that happen? What was their secret weapon?
It wasn't cannons, it wasn't swords. It was something you couldn't even touch. Pure, raw fear.
Fear was literally the key that unlocked a profitable surrender without all the risk.
And that right there perfectly explains the real point of their most famous symbol.
Yeah, that flag wasn't just for show. It was a weapon, a piece of terror branding.
When you saw that flag, you were getting a multiple choice question with very high stakes.
Which really makes you see the pirate captain differently, more like a brand manager.
So their primary job wasn't to fight, it was to build an absolutely terrifying reputation.
The idea was to build a reputation so scary that their flag did 90% of the work.
You see, they were absolute masters of psychological warfare. That always came first.
Their first victim wasn't the ship, it was the other crew's will to even fight back.
Golden Age pirates were terrifying, right? Well, that was no accident. It was all part of the plan.
See, pirate captains understood that fear was a tool, and they were absolute masters at crafting their brand.
So how'd they pull it off? It wasn't just random violence. It was high-stakes, interactive horror theater.
The pirate captain was the director of fear, the chief architect of his own monstrous persona.
And they knew a whispered story in a tavern could travel way faster and farther than their own ship.
And nobody, I mean nobody, mastered this better than Edward Teach. You probably know him as Blackbeard.
He transformed a simple ship's deck into his personal theater of psychological warfare. His costume, that massive braided beard, all designed to make him seem larger than life.
And for a special effect, before a fight, he'd light these slow-burning fuses woven right into his hair.
So, the result? He didn't look like a man. He looked like a demon, wreathed in smoke.
Okay, but what's really fascinating here is that this wasn't the act of some madman. No, this was the work of a brilliant psychologist. He absolutely understood the mechanics of fear.
The goal was to make himself seem inhuman, triggering a primal, superstitious dread in his victims.
It was a four-step playbook that made surrender feel like the only logical choice.
And here's the kicker, this whole strategy went way beyond just one ship's deck.
Pirates knew the real battlefield was the mind, so they let exaggerated stories of their cruelty spread like wildfire.
Think about it. An act of terror scares one crew. A story of terror that scares 100. They weren't just pirates. They were directors, building a legend, a monster, inside people's heads.
And that monster was so terrifying that most crews chose not to fight. I mean, why would you?
When you think of a pirate captain, you probably picture an absolute tyrant of the seas, right? But that whole monster persona? Turns out, it was carefully crafted for their enemies.
But for his own crew, a bunch of anti-authoritarian sailors, what was the real story? Well, the reality is pretty shocking. A pirate ship was basically a floating democracy. See, the captain was actually elected, and he could be voted out by his own crew.
And get this, he had just one vote in most matters, the same as any other guy on board.
So how in the world did this keep from turning into total chaos?
The answer was a formal contract that everyone signed, the Pirate Code. This thing laid out everything from splitting loot to limiting the captain's power. So all of this forced the captain into a really demanding double life.
To the outside world, he had to play the part of an absolute terrifying monster. But to his own men, he had to be a politician, charismatic, fair, and persuasive.
It meant his leadership was this constant, exhausting performance.
And here's the kicker. His absolute command only applied during the heat of battle.
So his authority wasn't built on fear, it was built on constantly proving he was competent.
Because if he failed to find plunder, the crew's confidence would just disappear.
I mean, imagine a constant performance review from your own armed and very volatile employees.
Turns out, pirates weren't just thieves, they were actually master psychologists.
We think of pirates as ruthless fighters, right? But for them, a battle was actually a failure.
To get why, let's put you in charge. Imagine you're a merchant captain, all alone at sea. Then, on the horizon, the Jolly Roger. And suddenly, you have a terrible choice to make.
You're forced to run a quick and kind of impossible cost-benefit analysis right on the spot.
If you fight back, the cost is just devastating, even if you somehow manage to win.
But if you surrender, well, you live, your crew lives, and the cargo is insured anyway.
But here's the thing. This choice you're making, it's not fair at all. It's been rigged.
The pirate's real goal is to trigger this exact calculation right inside your head.
So that first cannon shot isn't just an attack, it's the opening of a negotiation.
And how do they rig it? Well, it's a simple but brutal two-step process.
Their number one weapon wasn't a sword. It was their brand, built on pure, calculated fear. This wasn't random terror. This fear was a precision tool to make resistance seem like suicide.
So when you really think about it, a pirate captain was a master of game theory.
And this really reframes everything we think we know about famous pirates, doesn't it?
Their real prize wasn't the gold. It was winning without ever having to draw a sword.
Pirate captains were terrifying legends, right? But that reputation came at a huge psychological cost.
For a pirate captain, that terrifying legend wasn't just a reputation, it was a self-built trap.
So, first up, building the monster. See, a captain had to create this persona just to survive.
And this pirate persona, it wasn't just some act. It was a vital tool for staying in charge.
The logic here was, well, brutally simple. On these ships, fear was the only currency that mattered.
But here's the twist. That monster he built, it quickly became a prison with no way out.
Yeah, think of it like a second skin. It wasn't something they could just take off at night.
So you've got this constant battle inside. Any hint of mercy or hesitation was seen as a weakness.
And this creates a nasty feedback loop. He's literally trapped, hunted by the reputation he built himself.
And where does all this lead? Straight into a deep, inescapable paranoia. No surprise there.
I mean, how can you trust anyone? Every single crew member is a potential rival looking to take your spot.
He's the king of his little kingdom, sure, but he's also its most isolated and lonely prisoner.
So in the end, there's really only one way this can go. The legend completely consumes the man.
Yeah, these guys didn't get retirement parties. The great pirate captains almost always died violently.
Their careers were powerful, for sure, but also incredibly brutal and honestly pretty short-lived.
It's a cruel irony, isn't it? The very thing that gave them power also guaranteed their destruction.
He was this master architect who built a monster, only to find out he was its final victim.
It really makes you wonder, right? When you build a monster to get ahead, who's really in control?